What is going on, you guys? It's your boy, Cucked by Consciousness here, and we are back with episode 97 of the video game therapy series. I think I'm going to mine sand today, actually, because I could always use more of that. And I've been kind of aimlessly milling around my world a number of times in the last few episodes, so I feel like I need a plan, and today the plan will be sand. Is the plan. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about consciousness, so I suppose to provide some context, I just finished reading. It took me a long time to read it, not because it was a very like a lot of words to read. It was just a very dense book for me to kind of conceptualize and think about. But I finished Roger Penrose's The Emperor's New Mind. So very, very highly recommend the book. I recommend, I guess, if you're not going to read the whole thing, which you probably don't have to, the last chapter, especially when he talks about the seat of consciousness and the physics of mind, I think that is really the most potent. I'd say probably his introductory chapter and his closing chapter are the most potent. A lot of the ones in the middle deal with like abstract mathematics, which isn't probably totally isn't necessary, I guess, for the point he's making in the book. Like, I don't think it, Mandelbrot sets are cool, and I think we could know what they are mathematically and where they come from and what they are, but I don't know that they're significant to his argument specifically around consciousness. And that was why I read the book in the first place, was that I thought he had he was a prominent mind that had, I guess, contrary opinions on consciousness, and ones that I agreed with. Now, I didn't agree with them because they're contrary. I agree with them, period. And then they just so happen to be, as opposed to, something that isn't as popular. So anyway, I have a number of things to talk about that. Mainly about, I guess, just because we focus so much on intelligence, and it's fair. I realize that with AI, and it's always useful, it seems, to ask what is useful. And it's not really fair to ask like questions that lack, a pragmatic component to it. So I guess with supporters of lots of AI stuff would be quick to dismiss questions about what consciousness is, or where do we see consciousness or define it, as opposed to, well, it's just not a useful question. Who cares whether or not, I don't care whether or not ChatGPT is conscious. It doesn't really matter. How is it useful to me? How can it help me out? How can it write my emails or whatever the fuck that these AI tools allow people to do? So I realize that these aren't questions in terms of how practical, useful they are, but I think if we're especially going to speak about risk, that it inherently is a principled argument. It's an argument about the practicality of risk. I guess that it is in terms of what are the risk vectors, but I mean like existential risk. If we're going to speak about AI risks as existential risks to humanity, we could ignore in terms of what's practical and think about what, in terms of, not in terms of like what practically might happen, but we really have to assume kind of a in principle worst theory, like in the theoretically worst principled event, what could happen. So I think in doing that, it's important, and at least, I guess, a worthy discussion to determine what do we define as conscious. I said before, it's like, do you define it as a single ant conscious, or as a single ant, automata, or as a tree conscious, or like, what about a dog, right, or a horse, or even what about a chimpanzee? It's like, what do you define, like the ability to articulate language as a consciousness? But then at that point, then ChatGPT would be conscious. But I think most people would argue that it's not a conscious entity and it's not worthy of rights. I think that's really where the consciousness play comes in. It's not like I think consciousness on some level is somewhat of an arbitrary thing, but ultimately it's like, where does consciousness then, like, is it inherently a human thing? Are humans the only thing that can be conscious? And if so, are they the only things that kind of deserve, I suppose, morals or ethics in some sense, or at least have that attached to them, right? Or things that aren't conscious still have rights. I guess, is there rights for, a dog of some kind? And I guess we do have like animal abuse laws, but we consider them wholly on a different class than humans. And so because we don't have any like comparable species, there's not like human A and human B's. I think we're all the same. We're all the same species, at least, I guess, with different races and different, I guess, somewhat different histories of knowledge and language. We're all, no one's going to, like, I think the argument around people not being humans but still being humans is gone anymore. It's like the difference between a monkey and a human is well known. We're not calling people monkeys or having a different, I guess, slavery era classism, so to speak. We kind of know what we're all humans. Um, well, again, we treat animals very differently legally, and this isn't just a legal question; it's a philosophical question. But we treat animals very different legally than we would, actual humans and ones that we would give rights. So the place of where consciousness is, and like the line that decides consciousness and not conscious, I think is a useful conversation, and I guess one that people should take seriously and not just, well, it's just impractical. Understandably so, it is kind of impractical in the sense that there isn't much directly, but I think a lot of things don't begin with practicality in mind. I don't think the original people fucking around with transistors was immediately like, why isn't this isn't practical to business? How's it going to help me cut down a tree? And then now it's like, and then now it's quite obvious why it's practical to be dicking around with transistors. So I think this is a purely a very, very long R&D kind of discussion where it's not the return on investments in terms of figuring out or having answers to questions or things ready is not one that provides immediate utility, which goes against a little bit about my axiom of good philosophy being useful or good philosophy making you stronger, because this is a bit more abstract. But I suppose one argument around, or one potential argument around things being consciousness, is ability to kind of put oneself in one other self's shoes. So like a person in this camp might argue that, lions are conscious because they're able to like have self-awareness that they're like, that they're hunting something and think the way that the prey would think, like this kind of like first order of abstracted thinking is what allows it, is what defines it as being something that is conscious. So the ability to kind of conceptualize other things. But this, if we think about like computability and doing things programmatically, this would be no different than like a computer having like a sub program, right? Or even if it's a computer with multiple sub programs, or a program that writes sub programs of some sort. These can all be done algorithmically, and I think it points to a strong AI argument, where basically strong AI is the sense that there isn't anything like our brains are just very, very complicated computers, which I've been adamantly against, and it's not one that I think is reasonable. But the strong AI argument would say that, again, that this conscious representation of a line just being able to compute the thinking, so to speak, of a prey, or to get into a prey's shoes, that kind of abstraction, make it, calling that consciousness would then, I guess, give credence to a strong AIer's argument, which is not one that I think is compelling. The one that I thought was more interesting was surrounding, like, I guess Penrose in this, the end of this book, makes a lot of arguments towards like quantum influence on consciousness, and there inherently isn't any quantum influence. I guess there is, like, there's quantum influence everywhere, so to speak, but there isn't like, there's something inherently different about quantum influence with like the human quote unquote computer versus the quantum influence on a like traditional classical computer. So I guess a classical computer here would be like, the rig I'm playing this stupid game on, like that would be the classical computer. Whereas this kind of quantum influence computer would be like the human brain. And these are, like, I guess he's arguing fundamentally different things because of their quantum influence. And one thing that I think was compelling around this was called, or is the anthropic principle, which basically says there is something significant and or perfect and or like uniquely human, or something, some amount of significance on the exact time and place that we exist right now. And it's anthropic. And I guess if you're looking at the etymology of the word anthropic, you can see human is in there. And the anthropology is like the study of humanity and the history of it. But the anthropic principle states that there's a very particular, I guess, significance to the time and place we are now. Because I think if a few million years in either direction, the intelligent life as we know it is impossible. Now, I don't know if it totally invalidates intelligent life of all kind. Like, is it possible that things that aren't quite, I'll say, biological in nature could have developed into, what we might consider intelligent life? I mean, I don't know, but I guess that is more of a physicist's argument, since they would know more about what that is. But I mean, was life as we know it only possible the way we know it? Which sounds trivial, because I would say yes. But ultimately, I think there is an argument based in physics, and at least with biology and physics, that that the intelligent humans as they exist now, like the surplus that allowed evolution to, I guess, grant us bigger brains, seems a little too perfect. Like even when considering the massive, I guess, number of instances of anything happening, it also seems it's a little too perfect statistically. I think that's just kind of the way of looking at it. And we could just say that we're lucky. I guess that's one way of just kind of tearing down the anthropic principles, that we're just lucky. That's it. It's not that. Sure, it is. It's a statistical anomaly, but statistically anomalies happen all the time. So it's not like it's that crazy to think that we're just, intelligent life as we know it is just fortunate. I guess that's fair, I suppose, on some level. But it also, again, kind of gives more credence to a more spiritual or a less deterministic view on humanity and why we're here, or what we're doing. I guess the other interesting part that Penrose argues is that he kind of thought that this quantum influence, like he thought even even with the times that we know about evolution and like how evolution evolved our consciousness, it almost seems too like good. Like evolution was too, like, why would it even select conscious beings? And I guess on some level it makes sense, but I guess besides it just being random, and again, just kind of citing that like, oh, we were lucky. It does seem strange that I guess the life as we know it developed, evolution invested very, very heavily into like our brains, which would be kind of a very dumb investment, or at least a very, very long-term investment. And I guess if you didn't believe that there was some planning involved or there was some other influence in it, you could just say it was just very, very lucky that we invested so much into a brain and somehow was able to like perfectly select, and that evolution even pushing us in the direction of becoming as intelligent as we are today. Again, intelligence by our own metrics, again, seems too much of like a perfect accident. So his argument around quantum influence was basically that there is kind of an unknown salt or something with quantum mechanics that allowed intelligent life as we know it, like us humans, to exist, in the sense that there was kind of other influence that adjusted our evolutionarily timeline. And so the way I would look at that, I guess, for computers, so for example, if we were to develop, let's say like, I don't know, we'll say like conscious classical computers. So if we imbued them with some amount of like evolutionary ability, so like we would essentially breed computers in some way. What I think the analogy for this is, and this is at least where my head went, was that we would have basically there would have to be like a giant, almost the scope of the universe level quantum computer that then like controls the evolution of classical computers through their evolutionary process. And this, of course, obviously assumes that there's some like breeding or biological component to classical computers, which we don't really think of that as being the case. But it was interesting at Isaac Asimov's The Last Question, that was kind of the way that robots evolved in his time, was that humans built basically these giant AIs, and what they would do is they would reproduce themselves. They would basically be the size of planets. They'd be computers the size of planets that were ingested all the data that they could. And really what their job was to do was to kind of replicate themselves on another planet. Which again, is a very, very biological thing to apply to a computer. So if it's working in that same way, basically what I think Penrose's argument is that there's some kind of meta quantum computer. In his case, it would just be some unknown quantum influence that would kind of guide or control the evolutionary principles of these computers breeding. Again, breeding is kind of a weird word to use about computers, but would control that. Sorry, I'm about to blow up here. Which is an interesting way to look at it. So I guess the way to frame that would be that there's like not the way to frame it, but a way to look at it would be that there's like the human brain then at that point might be like a kind of a quantum computer that wraps a classical computer. So like, yes, I guess the basic neurons of our computer, it's a classical computer, I guess, in terms of just the neurons. But then there would be this like meta computer that is quantum and is also, I guess, on some levels more than just the human. It's not within the classical, it's not within just like the singular realm of just where the brain is. Like, I think that's part of why quantum mechanics is so confusing is that it's not like, it, like there's like particles, there's things that are connected, but not physically connected the way we'd see them today. Like we would say that like my hand is connected to this door and it'd be pretty obvious, but the logic in a lot of quantum mechanical procedures that we've observed is basically like, okay, there's a particle on this side of the universe that is connected to one 40 gajillion light years away in some sense. So the meta computer that kind of governs our classical computers of our brains is exerting that kind of influence, where it's not like we couldn't isolate this meta quantum computer, or this, again, I'm using quantum computer here and like an unknown principle of quantum mechanics kind of interchangeably. But basically there's not a physical classical connection between the two things. So it becomes very, very difficult to like think about it like an engineer because you can't, it's all encompassing. You can't like, I guess, build something like that or kind of just even think together through the architecture of what a universal size quantum computer would do. And so I think that is a compelling argument for me around consciousness. Is it kind of, I guess, builds on top of the anthropic principle, in the sense that there is some kind of quantum influence. Now, whether or not humans are central to that or whether they're important or significant of that that's not really the point. I don't know that humans themselves have any kind of significant, like, so, I say pseudo-religious or spiritual reverence in this meta quantum realm, but it's possible they do. And I think it's not a bad thing necessarily to, I guess, feel special in that, right? As humans. But I think it is compelling that there is certainly quantum influence on our consciousness, such that allowed us to exist in the first place. I guess besides just being, I guess, erring on the side of humility versus the side of like, I guess, I don't know, impulsivity in terms of our understanding. So I think the impulsive compulsion would just be to say that, oh no, we figured it out. Like we're merely just these classical computers. Whereas I think the more humble thing to say would be that we are classical computers, I guess, controlled by quantum computers, which inherently don't. And while there is like kind of quantum computers that we use classically, I think when most people think of, or if you look up quantum computers, they're not going to talk about like quantum computers that, they're not going to talk about quantum influence on a computer itself. They're going to talk about using principles of quantum mechanics to do, what is otherwise classical computing stuff. Meaning it's like a very, very fast computer, but ultimately it functions deterministically in the same way that our classical computers do. And yeah, it uses like the stochastic outputs of quantum mechanics, but it is no less functions the same to us as a classical computer, again, with just improved processing and different logic and kind of weird quirks to worry about. But I think thinking about consciousness as a computer would be, again, the equivalent of not really knowing where this meta quantum computer is, and its influence is beyond the scope of just our classical mind. So it is, I don't know, it's interesting to me, when it's compelling in some sense to think that. And I guess the difficult part of this argument is that there isn't like it's not like there is some very rationalistic, it is more or less just intuition about the proof of this. Like the proof itself is just, okay, I have an intuition that this is the case. I don't know, I can't explain why. It's like, it sounds just as silly as being, well, I have an intuition that Bigfoot's real. It doesn't mean it is. It's like, understandably so. But again, we're speaking about, again, I guess, potentially existential threats to humanity and consciousness. And sometimes intuition has its own strange ways of doing this. I think if you look at if you look at the career of, I guess, someone like Carl Jung or something, I guess maybe he was just conspiratorial in his analysis, but he noted many, many times where things just were intuitions or synchronicities across, again, kind of unspoken lengths and distances that make no classical sense to, I guess, a traditional mathematician or a physicist, but ultimately is like something that they were very aware of as being real, again, and real, I guess, to them. I guess it's hard just to dismiss those things outright. I think it's in fact more scientific to remain skeptical of it being entirely a classical, or quantum mechanics, even quantum mechanics being an incomplete theorem, being all there is, and not assuming that there may still be a piece missing. And even if intuition is the only thing that really supports that argument, I think that's still, I don't know that that's inherently something that should just exit off from, especially an argument or thinkings that are very, very theoretical in nature, because these are inherently, these aren't very, we're not worried about the practicality of any of these. These are, again, theoretical things. And I think that's happened a lot too. I think even with advances in kind of classical math and physics, it's happened because people have intuitions on stuff. It's like, oh, I kind of, they say they have these breakthroughs when they're just like, I don't know, mowing the lawn or something like that, or like feeding their kid. All of a sudden, that they're like, oh wait, I think this kind of mathematical concept came to me, where it's like, I think the person who discovered benzene, was it Freud or something? It wasn't Freud, it was somebody else. Like, it happened to him in a dream. He was dreaming about this cyclical six-shaped thing. He's like, oh my God, this is like the carbon atom or benzene or something like that. I think it was carbon, I think. I botched that reference, but you can look it up if you want. But it came to him in a fucking dream, which again sounds just silly and is easy for like a rationalist to be like, well, these are just random occurrences and things. But I don't think it's something that we can say wholly for certain does not exist. I think you have to take a more agnostic approach to it. Versus, I think if you're overly scientific, you'll just be atheistic in the sense where it's like, well, I have no proof for this, therefore it's wrong, which I think would be a mistake. The other only interesting thing with consciousness and I guess classical versus quantum computing versus like I guess just in this realm in general is, I guess, the role of like what we would call like the subconscious mind. Like if somebody's not what we would say is consciously aware, like if they're on some anesthesia or some kind of like that, like what kind of influence that has. And this would include dream states. Does that function more like a classical computer or a quantum computer, or what? Where does that fit in to any of this? I think it's still to an interesting question. I think what Penrose's argument around this specifically was that it's again, it's possible that the subconscious is also a quantum influenced classical computer, but it's also possible that it is maybe a more purely biological classical computer, where it's something that we could, I guess, if understood enough and could build a big enough classical computer to do it, we could, create something like that where it encodes, I guess, biological or, I guess, anthropological or historical stimuli and responses for us humans to do. And this is, I've seen this in Jung's work with symbols that appear throughout people's dreams, and it's the same symbols, and it's like there seems to be a genetic, I guess, a cross generational. It's not like, this is purely things that happen in the conscious mind. I think there's a generational and subconscious influence that these symbols have had on humanity. And of course, they're meaningless outside of like to other species or anything, but to us, surely they've been passed down. Again, not through the conscious mind or anything like that. They've been purely subconscious, I guess, gifts across generations. But they're the same symbols we've seen in our subconscious mind. And again, this could be a classical computer just giving us some kind of information. But it very well could be also another quantum computer. I guess I'm more inclined to, I think Penrose kind of erred on the side of it being a classical computer that, again, a very, very big one and strong one that guides our, I guess, our evolutionary mind and for us to survive and things like that. But especially the conscious mind, I think, has more mysteries. And I guess for us, at least, more compelling to think that it has more blatant quantum influence. Like there are lots of things I think we see. And I guess the reason this is difficult is because pretty much most every other thing we've seen, quantum influence is not important, right? It doesn't matter. Like quantum influence on, and I guess like even just like the production of even the production of anything, like making a chair or something like that, or making chemical drugs. And this, it all seems very systematic and perfect because there is ultimately no quantum influence to even think about, because it's a very mechanistic classical process. Everything's big. Everything's big, in a chair factory. It's not like we need to think about, particles. There's like air that's totally okay. Like there's air if there's a millimeter off or something like that. Who cares? But I think with the consciousness and you working with the human brain, especially something that has evolved over millions of years and something that is so intricate and so deep, I think it is a lot more realistic to think there's a lot more quantum influence with that, because it works. It's not only such small scales. I mean, you could argue then that like an ant's brain has more quantum influence because it's smaller. That's not what I'm talking about. But I think especially considering the, I guess, the evolutionary history of human consciousness, as well as the size, as well as the complexity that I guess we can observe, it's easier to think that there's more quantum influence there. And I guess it's I guess it's hard to draw an analogy to that because, again, to work at a chair factory or business or economics, these things are there's not quantum effects and all these that are blatant and obvious, or ones that are even worth considering. Because at some point, it's like, who cares if there's some minor quantum that's close enough, right? But I think the point of this is not to arrive at a close enough to conscious thing. At that point, then like ChatGPT is close enough to a lyricist, but it's like we're not talking about being close enough or good enough. So you kind of have to throw away, like, I guess, again, the engineer's mind, where it's like, let's build this to like to be more of the, I guess, the philosopher, the physicist, and be absolute, or the mathematician in some sense, and like try to prove things beyond, using some kind of, terminology or abstraction that is it is much more, I guess, we'll say superb than it would be just like good enough. Like, good enough is not good enough if we're speaking about what consciousness is, or what constitutes like humanity versus something else. So I don't know. It's very, very interesting to think about. I guess consciousness in the context of evolution and all that. The other, I guess, this is the last thing I'll talk about before I move on to something not related to to consciousness. So I suppose if you're not interested in this at all, or this is boring, then you only have one more little blurb to go. I already lost what I was going to say. Oh, the passage of time. One other argument about what consciousness is even mathematics and physics don't have a directional flow of time. Like, to us, time moves in one direction. And sure, like, I guess if you're baked or drunk or something like that, it like moves at different speeds, and like sleeping is kind of, time teleportation. It's a little bit more relative to us. But like, if you add like a physicist or a mathematician, time is purely like one dimension, and they're totally disposable between like an extra dimension of time and an extra dimension of space. Like giving us the choice between an extra, difference between for us, an extra dimension of space versus an extra dimension of time is like, that's very, very difficult to conceptualize. Like, would I move down to two, would I have two time dimensions in one space? But that would be, how would they even work? Like, I have no conception of that. Whereas mathematically with physics or math, it's the same thing. It's like the dimensions of time and space don't mean anything to us. There's no flow. There's no like directional utility of time. And in a lot of physics concepts are time asymmetric, in the sense that, I guess, beyond entropy just increasing, things, it doesn't matter if they're going forward or backwards in time. It is ultimately asymmetric. Whereas to us, obviously things go in time moves one direction, time moves forward. Time isn't going back, and time isn't also just like, okay, let's consider our dimension of time a dimension of space and do the math again. It's like, to us, those are like, it's a very, very obvious and potent fact that time moves in one direction for us. Again, not even not at one speed per se, but really at kind of, I guess, one collective speed in some sense. We have clocks that we've tuned to move to tune to one kind of tune. But in math or in physics, it doesn't matter. There's no flow of time. There's no direction of time. It doesn't really, they're interchangeable. Who cares what direction, whether it's going forward or whether we assume 1 million years have elapsed, or like the practicality of all that, like the dimensions of time and the flow of time mean absolutely nothing to a mathematician or a physicist. So then one argument around consciousness is that it's simply the awareness of the passage of time, where you could say something is conscious if it has I'll say like a linear or pseudo-linear observation of the passage of a time dimension. And now, is it possible that we're unconscious of a place where there's two time dimensions, where time can move, again, according to two different time dimensions? Of course, we only have, this again makes no sense to us, but instead of it being like, 2 seconds, it'd be like 2 squared seconds, to us, which, again, doing math like that in our minds is like, doesn't make any fucking sense. What do you mean 2 squared seconds? What's it's a squared second? How does it even work? How is that useful or interesting at all to me? But I think that's why we could say that, I guess our consciousness in some ways unique or different is that we observe things in one, I suppose, 1 second, not 1 squared second, and also not like no 0 seconds. Like, if we only had 4, I suppose, space dimensions or something, we would have no conception of time at all. So consciousness being just the awareness of the linear passage or pseudo-linear passage of one dimension of time would be another interesting way to look at, I guess, an interesting way to define it as something, because it doesn't really exist in our mathematical or physical abstractions, which I think is fascinating on some level. I don't know, that could be what consciousness is this the passage of time. But anyway, I'll move on to something a lot stupider than that, or I guess that being hopefully the stupidest thing I talk about. But I'll move on to something else. I guess if that is boring to you, because it gets boring to me eventually. It's not like I'm not a physicist, but I like reading and asking questions and being curious about stuff. So I guess it leads me down these dumb rabbit holes where I have to, think about that. Sorry. I guess I have one amendment to something I mentioned earlier that I just saw on my list. I talked earlier about like a tiger having like the ability to kind of represent or like abstract his own mind into the mind of a prey of some kind. So like a tiger could think like, I don't know, an antelope or something would to know how to hunt the tiger. And that's why we have consciousness. That's why we evolved to have consciousness, to have this abstracting thinking ability to be able to like think like our prey. And that is what makes us conscious. And I don't have anything else to share on that specifically, but the hilarious example that they saw in the book was that, okay, if a representation within oneself was like evidence of consciousness, then like a video camera that you just point in a mirror would have a representation of itself within itself, therefore would be like a conscious thing or something that would meet that criteria of consciousness, which I thought was a silly but like funny example. If we use that as a line of argument, again, very, very abstract argument and not, and I guess not one that many people would like entertaining, but I thought it was funny to think about like pointing a video camera at a mirror and being like, well, this has a representation of itself within itself, therefore is like a self-aware being. It's not, I mean, yes, it does have like an image of itself within itself, but does that constitute self-awareness? No, I think most people, no one would argue that it does. But that might be the real, a lot of people that is what their litmus test of consciousness is like self-awareness and some kind of self-awareness. So, but what is self-awareness really? How do you know if something is self-aware? Does an ant know that it is an ant? It obviously doesn't know what an ant is and doesn't know English, but does it know, like, I guess, is it, to what extent is it aware of its facilities and its body and its, even like the passage of time? Is it aware that time of any kind in any form exists for the ant? I don't know. That's not for me to know. I guess I'm not an ant, and I hope for never to be. But that is an interesting thought, that it's there's an element of self-awareness with consciousness too that needs to be mediated, and something that needs to be understood, at least, I guess, or at least just articulated. Yeah, let's see. This is totally not even related to anything I just talked about, but it is it's interesting. Looking back, I guess this is again much more anthropological and historical in nature. At the different wars, World War I was, and this is just an interesting kind of sentence, I suppose, that came out of this. World War I was like the chemist war because of like all the gas, basically all the gas and shit that they used. And World War II, because of the atom bomb, was like the physicist war. So then if we extrapolate this, would the World War III be like the mathematicians? Because I guess we're moving to stricter and stricter forms of mathematics, because I say people would argue, I mean, not argue, mathematics is a pure form, or physicists is a purer form of mathematics than chemistry is. And I guess mathematics is even purer than physics, and I guess in the abstract sense. So if the wars move in that direction, is it reasonable to think that the World War III, whatever that might be, is the mathematical war? It's not a war between physicists, developing the atomic bomb, or chemists developing different gases and chemical warfare, but is like, again, some kind of cyber war, which I think is a very reasonable, I guess, opinion to have. But is it fought cryptographically, right? Are we using different, is that really the element of it is, or is it all cyber attacks? Which I think is a reasonable way to frame the different world wars. So I don't know. I just thought that was an interesting sentence. Really, is it'd be kind of a information or a cyber warfare would be the obvious extrapolation. And then I'm thinking about a war beyond that. Like if World War IV exists, like I guess what is purer than mathematics or cryptography or cyber in some sense? I suppose that would be, again, that would kind of what goes beyond like pure mathematics and pure physics. I guess pure mathematics of, I guess, pure physics, like we're talking about atoms and stuff, and that would be the quantum mechanics realm. So that would be kind of this quantum, but I think that even gets messier. That it doesn't get more elegant and clean. Like I think if you get really deep into math, things get really clean in the sense that like things are very, very exact, and we get very particular. We get very small in scale. We also get like very, very supremely large in scale. Like we talk about entire galaxies and planets as if they're just numbers on a paper. But and we speak about like, I guess, things that are so small in nature that we have no ability to conceptualize the sheer scale of these on a macro or a micro level. But even beyond that is like quantum mechanics just gets completely, like, it's a complete brain fuck, really. It's notoriously difficult to conceptualize what the fuck is going on. And even a lot of plus, since all of it's kind of made up, it's not like, I mean, it's not the sense that it's like not real. It is real in some sense, but it's real only as like an abstraction. So like the example I've used before is like, what is the difference in reality between like the woke mind virus and like the carbon atom or something? Surely like they're both like, I think we'd be quick to say that the carbon atom is real and the woke mind virus is not, but they're simply just names for something. That's all that we've done with this, is just give it a name. It's like carbon wasn't gifted to us. English wasn't really gifted to us. It's really an abstraction on what we see. So the physical phenomenon that we observe with a carbon atom is enough that we give it a name, and we're like pretty much dead certain that like the carbon atom is, we know what the representation looks like. Our representation, we call it carbon. It looks like this. It functions like this. It has this many of these things, which again are further abstractions. Like even like an electron or something like that is not, it's not necessarily like real in an absolute sense. It's not like it's God's electron. He told us that it was called an electron or something like that. Maybe a different intelligent life calls it something different. And that doesn't mean it's not real at all, but it's just an abstraction on what the properties are. Like, and we have a very, very good idea of what the properties of a carbon atom or an electron are. We know what they are. We can do all kinds of math and shit with them. The abstraction is very, very elegant and good. That's why we'd say that that's like a very, very true and accurate thing. Versus like the woke mind virus is like, that is so loosely, that's so loosely conceptualized and means, I mean, you could argue it means almost nothing, but it means very little, like in terms of a pure mathematical sense of what math can I do given that the woke mind virus is real? Like what does that award me? What level of abstraction does that give me utility to be able to do anything with that? I can't. I have nothing. Given the woke mind virus. So that's why, like, again, I'm not saying that they're both not real or they're both real. I think if you pointed a gun to my head, maybe pick one, I'd obviously pick the carbon atom being real and the woke mind virus not real. But on some level, they're both not real. And they're also both real in some sense. It's just kind of like a spectrum of what is like most, what we can observe as being more accurate than something else. So the abstraction of the carbon atom is obviously very, very much more accurate, but there's still new properties being discovered about these atoms. It's not like once we've given a name, we figured everything out. It's like, clearly there's a lot more that discovers. Let's suppose that there is like, I mean, this is obviously ridiculous. This is obviously not real, but there's some like some worm that has embedded themselves in the minds of millions of people that we've now like, the woke mind virus is now like a legitimate actual like mind bug or some kind like that, which is not what I'm advocating at all. But I'm saying we would then have a clearer picture of what that, again, quote unquote, kind of real thing is. In the same way that like for a long time, we just called it carbon and we knew that it had these properties, but we didn't know the exact atomic weight. And then we knew that the atomic weight, and then we didn't know how it interacted with other. So like we're still discovering new things about the chemicals and things that we would argue are like very like true as fuck, but they're still just like abstractions that we're asymptotically getting closer to some kind of absolute truth. So I don't know. That's kind of my whole spiel on things being true. It's like, if you want something to be true, start with a name. So name it. Okay. If you have some kind of, and that was my other thought. I think I brought this up before, but because now that we're in the world of scams and people fucking people over, it's all about, conning people and how do you, I don't know, fuck people out of their money somehow. So you basically, the strategy would be to just make up a new field of study. Maybe I'll call it like, people say like quantum philosophy. That'd be a field I would study, a field called quantum philosophy. Is quantum philosophy a real field? Someone had to make it up at some point, right? So I'm just making it up now. And then like I make it up now, and then I can start, defining terms of quantum philosophy. And then some people, of course, I think rightfully so, are just like, okay, quantum philosophy isn't a real field. You just made that up. And not only is it, I mean, of course, everything is kind of made up, but it's not a useful or a it's not a field that I'm interested in giving much credence to. And I think that's why it's like, it's not that I say that like psychology or psychiatry are like botched sciences or anything like that, but I think people kind of treat them in the same level of purity that they would treat a mathematician or a physicist. And I just give less, I give less power and less potency to those fields. And it's not that I'm devaluing what they do and not to say they do nothing valuable, but ultimately I think that there is so much like human, social, and financial elements to psychiatry and psychology. I don't give as much credence to those as fields as I would, physics or mathematics. So in the same way, like quantum physics, most people would be like, okay, the field of quantum physics to me is not a strong enough or a compelling enough field for me to acknowledge the pure existence of. But again, I named it, so it's real in some very, very broad sense, but it's not widely accepted or something like that. And I suppose you could give social metrics or something like that to validate something. But again, I would argue that as psychology is a validated social, it has tons of social cred, and psychiatry has tons of social cred. But I don't give nearly as much credence as they would, that I guess other normal people would give to, well, he's a psychiatrist, he's a psychologist, he knows. I think it's much more of like it's a much shittier science than I think most people would like, or most people realize. I think they treat it like it's a physicist or something, but it's not. It's not at all like that. It's even closer to like, I don't know, like a personal trainer. Like, yeah, he might be jacked, but he doesn't know how or why he got jacked, or why, if he can help you get jacked. Like, yeah, he might be able to help you a little bit, but it's not like he's not gonna be able to calculate everything and give you all the answers. It's probably just like, might move you in the right direction in some sense. So that's kind of the same way I treat psychiatry and psychology, but they're no less, I guess, real in some sense. So I guess here I am, proclaiming the beginning of quantum philosophy as a field, which of course isn't real until now. So now it's real. So you have to acknowledge it, and I'm going to major in it. And then you can pay me $80,000 to get a certificate of quantum philosophy. I forgot what it's called already. Okay. I will move on to something else. Oh yeah, I suppose this kind of relates to our very deterministic, rationalistic philosophies. I guess because I'm on that binge, I might as well try to empty off that part of my list now. I think we're just so fast as, I guess, I'll say kind of loosely logical or evolutionary, also just evolutionary creatures. We're so fast to seek out, find, articulate and rationalize like causal responses for things. Like, I am fat because I did this. I died because I did this. The reason I'm successful is because I did this. It's like they're very quick to pick out. You don't see many people that just kind of attribute things to just blind luck, right? And I think it's not often we see it's like, well, I don't know, I did this, but it honestly could have been the opposite. I did, and I still succeeded. It's not like we know. We just love causal relationships with things. We love saying that, okay, the reason that this happened was because of this. Simple, done, easy. And it's never really that simple. But I think, especially as if you get very, very abstract and very into the weeds of why things happen, especially if it's more like metaphysical, or it's like, why did I get cancer at something, or why did my kid die, or why is stuff that is, again, very, very difficult for people to like. They want to seek out causal relationships, and they ultimately end up in cults, most of them, unfortunately. But I think part of what I think a smart philosophy with that would be to fight the instinct and the immediate desire to seek out causal relationships, and just make peace with like the unknown, and accept that while like, just make peace with impossible questions. That's really what it's making peace with what is possible, and making peace with the impossible. So I don't know that there probably isn't a causal like reason why I can tell you that your son got cancer. Sure, I could make up that, oh, it was there's this evil god that you ate the cheese Chex Mix once, and then all of a sudden that was a cursed bag of Chex Mix. Like I could come up with these ridiculous like reasons why this harm has befallen you, or why things didn't happen a certain way. And in the same way, not that they would need me to tell them that, but people that were fortunate or were lucky, or maybe they, I don't know, were born 8 feet tall and they can go play in the NBA. I'm not going to I could give them ridiculous reasons as to why they are. And we could kind of debate the merits of, well, how reasonable is this rational explanation? A lot of times they're just, I think it's easier, and I'd say even more healthy in some very general sense, to just ignore the fucking practicality of like getting to this perfect causal answer. Because again, ultimately, not only can it completely backfire in the sense that you could believe and be bought into this like causal relationship between two things that just aren't, that's just not why it fucking happened that way. It's like, oh, it rained because, I dropped an egg on the ground. that had nothing, like, sure, maybe every time you drop an egg, let's say you're just unbelievably lucky. Every time you drop an egg, it starts raining. That, again, is it really fair and useful to like assume that you're 100% correct in the sense that whenever you drop an egg, it will rain? It's like, just make peace with the sense that you don't fucking know why things happen. It's not, I don't have to know why, why you got this random disease or why certain things happened. It's, again, just kind of making peace with that. I would realize it's kind of an impossible task sometimes for people, especially if it's I don't know, existential or very, I guess it puts their consciousness or life into question, which is why I don't really take it that serious. Not that I don't take life that serious in the sense I'm running around killing people, but I don't take it any that serious in the sense that I know that there's some amount of just like, I guess I'll do what I can with what I have kind of thinking. And if it's like, this is my last day, then fine. It's not that I want it to be my last day. That's fine. But the other thing is I wouldn't spend all day like being, let's be grateful for the life that you have. But am I supposed to spend the whole day being grateful for like every moment that I have? At that point, I'm wasting it. Like by being like, at some point it's a gift, but I don't think it's a gift that I need to spend all my days just like, oh, thank you so much for being alive today. It's like most times life doesn't really even feel like a gift. It kind of feels like a curse. And at some point you kind of wish that you were just a fucking ant and you had no idea, that you had no conception of, not only like consciousness or time or awareness or, things going on, or even just like nutrition and food and economics and the world. A lot of times it's like, it doesn't feel like a gift. It's more of a curse. So I don't think it's healthy either to just spend all day, gushing over the fact, oh, I'm so grateful to be alive. Thank you. Oh my God. And then you just thank who? I don't know. Like you can thank physics, you can thank math, you can thank whatever. But at a certain point, thanking almost becomes like if I were God and I'd made people and they spent all day running around thanking me, I'd be like, can you guys just stop thanking me and like do something for fuck's sake? Like, I mean, I don't mean to, you're welcome. Okay. Just go do something. Don't just sit here the whole fucking day and talk about, oh my God, thank you. I said, it's fine. Okay. It's really not that valuable. I mean, there's billions of you. Go do something. Don't sit here all day and thank me. Or sit all day and curse me. Go worry about yourself. Do what you can with what you have. Don't worry so much about, thanking this omnipotent being or not thanking or cursing or, figuring out who exactly it is. Just do what, like, I don't know, pick something else to do and fucking do it at that point. Which I realize is, I don't know, it's probably hypocritical for me to say because I've probably been on the other side of that argument plenty of times. But ultimately, it does drive me nuts that people are like, you'd be so, grateful for, like, it's like, I don't, at some point we're all kind of victims of certain circumstance in the sense that we're alive. I didn't choose to be alive. I'm a victim of that circumstance in some sense. So instead of, there's some fine line between being immensely and like immortally grateful and just spending my whole day just being grateful for being alive in the first place, or the gifts I have or the privileges I have, versus just like doing anything with it. I mean, even just like living at all. It's like you spent your whole time surviving and being alive and being grateful that you're alive. But what'd you do with it? Did you live even a moment? And I've spoken before about like the difference between being alive and living. I think that there's wisdom, I would argue, is the time that one is spent living and not merely being alive. An 80-year-old could have no wisdom if they spent their whole time just merely surviving and not spending any time really like alive. And I realize those are wishy-washy words and not things that I guess have real, I don't know, have much potency to them. But I think there is a lot of people just spend too much time just surviving and not and being grateful for even living at all, but not spending a moment to actually live a life that they have. Again, whatever that means to you. So I'm not saying that you have to, there is some divine calling and there's some, I just think there's something, it is kind of subjective in terms of what is living and what's valuable to you, but be it not something that is like just thanking some random person or thanking some random entity or physical process for whatever you have. I guess, or spiting it the whole time. Like surely there's something productive between spiting and thanking this omnipotent being that you could spend your time doing. So yes, life is a gift, but it doesn't deserve, eternal thanks. Just, thanks when you wake up, say 5 minutes, say thanks, and then go on with your fucking day. And don't spend the rest of it dwelling on, should I be thankful or should I be angry? It's like, either way, it isn't going to matter whether or not you're thankful or angry for being alive or not. Like you are alive. So just, what are you going to do with it now? Just be angry, like spend the time debating whether or not you should be thankful or angry, or to find something meaningful. And I guess the way this can kind of manifest itself, I guess, in a time where it's, I guess post scarcity is it develops some kind of your own philosophy of some kind, and these doesn't have to be scientific per se, or it doesn't have to be right, but it should be some kind of holistic thing, and then just do it. And I mean, like, so I guess have tenets of your philosophy and then execute them as best as you can. Have good days, have bad days. That's kind of the way it is. So I guess with mine, it's like I have there's investments in things that I want to do into my body, into my mind. And it's not that I'm like serving any higher purpose or anything with this. These are just my random philosophy that I've developed in my life. It's like I'm going to take care. I'm going to eat well as I can. I suppose I'm going to, I guess, treat my body in some vaguely good sense. I'm going to, I guess, have a balance between searching for more experiences versus like ruminating or appreciating the ones that I have. So there's some balance between like, not just spending all day in my room with, versus being grateful or too ungrateful, or too grateful or being ungrateful. Like there's a balance between that. So there's like all these, balance is one big key component of my whole philosophy. And it's not that it's right or it's like it needs to have a book associated with it or something. It doesn't need any of that. It just needs you and a commitment from you to do what you say you're going to do, and then amend it if it's not working. It's fine. Like I've amended all kinds of things and philosophies, and I've 180'd on stuff. That's part of it. There's not this absolute book that's right. Like the books are all like, I don't know, 30% right, 50% right, or something like that. And it's not necessarily that you need to like make it more right, but at least have some kind of pursuit towards that. And yes, the pursuit's meaningless. It doesn't matter whether you died tomorrow and all of it was for nothing, or you didn't make any progress on it, or you didn't finish the book, or you didn't have your master plan or something like that. It's fine. Like again, you can do with what you can with what you have. It's not necessarily something that I don't know. There's no rules with any of it. So make up your own rules and then try to do them. And then whenever game over happens for Roy or player one or whoever you are, just again, it was fun. Whatever. I laughed a few times. I ate some food. I had fun. I met people. Whatever. Anyway, that's going to be it for this time. Sorry about the whole fucking physics rant. I finished that book and I was kind of in this reading fugue last night. So I was deep into quantum mechanics and all that. But I promise I'm not that into it and it's not my whole shtick. I have plenty of other, I guess, dumber, more interesting things for me to talk about next time. But anyway, that's it for this time. Peace out.